Okay, yeah. Just quick introduction. My name is Daisuke. I'm an AI entrepreneur in Tokyo. I'm running a hackathon community with for the Python machine learning with 8,000 members. And, this time we are working on a book about how AI can beat COVID-19. With 3 members from University of Tokyo, they are medical entrepreneur, researchers. We will be publishing the book in February, and then this interview will be the special contents in this book. Thank you very much for your help.
Okay, sounds good to me.
Yeah, okay. And then I think I'm allowed to record this interview according to Zach-san. So may I start?
Yes, of course. We will have the shared recording on the Skype side, and just for your benefit, once you start a local recording, I will also do a local recording, so it's higher quality for you afterwards, and I'll send it to you also on Skype.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm gonna start recording. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
So this is now recorded. Let me just double check. Yes, this is recorded. Okay. I plan to do this interview for 45 minutes. Is it good for you?
Yes, of course. And usually we will publish the video, if you're okay with it, to our YouTube channel. But if you think a transcript is preferred, we can also do a transcript instead of the video to publish.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to start. Our book title is How Can AI Beat Coronavirus? And thank you very much for your time. So this time, as a preparation, I talked with as many Taiwanese as possible. And then these voices from them reflect a strong point of your strategy. Example, my Taiwanese friends, back-end engineer, female entrepreneur, ex-Googler, manufacturer, GovZero members. Okay, so I prepared nine questions. First question is, as of October 2020, many Japanese companies are suffering from bad economy after pandemic. My strategy is preparing as a pessimist and act as an optimist. So what is your advice or encouragement for Japanese business people and citizens? What mentality should we have like smart person like you?
Okay. There is a saying I often quote from Leonard Cohen, and I quote, "There is a crack in everything, and that's how the light gets in," unquote. The idea is that on a common issue like COVID, it both, of course, separates people because of social distancing and so on, but it also connects people like never before. Like previously, before the coronavirus pandemic, we will probably not be having this conversation, and this book probably would not be published because the idea around AI before the coronavirus is definitely not specializing in the humanitarian part of AI. People think about transhumanism and people spend a lot of time on vanity project. I say this without judgment, but by making people look like better than other people and so on. And nowadays, these aesthetics are no longer the norm. We don't see people showing off on Instagram or on social media anymore because we understand that there are much more pressing issues to be solved and we need to direct our energy to it. And so I think the main idea is here about the common good. If we have the common good in mind, then it makes it easier for us to find the common projects that we can all contribute on. But if we think more individualistically, like raising my status above other people and so on, that will be detrimental in the time of coronavirus.
Okay, well, this is a wonderful insight. And do you mean more, I can say, company with social mission has an opportunity to grow their business, and then this non-social company should shift to the social direction in this pandemic?
Well, in the pandemic, for example, we see that many companies are forced to adopt teleworking. But teleworking is not just a neutral technology, right? It also connects people more intimately. It allows people to spend more time with the people they care in their locality, and also makes for a more diverse and inclusive workforce. If, of course, you have broadband as human right, otherwise it excludes people also. So any new COVID strategies has this light side of people who previously were unable to accept a more socially flexible arrangement like telework are often forced to accept it. But even after the pandemic goes away, like in Taiwan, it's been 5 months with no local cases, still we use telework whenever appropriate because people already have a good experience with teleworking as compared to maybe 10 or 15 years ago when teleworking was not very practical and the connection quality doesn't work at all. But nowadays, you can see and hear me just fine. I can hear you just fine, and this makes teleworking a modern reality. So it doesn't have to be social purpose, but we do have to evaluate the social or more pro-social consequences of the ways that we have changed in working together. And organizational changes are also a kind of technology, right? Teleworking is a social innovation.
Okay, great. I checked several of your keynote speech, and then several times you were mentioning about being robust is important in a society and business. So in the COVID-19, all the business need to be more robust. For example, some of the restaurant owners opening only the kitchen in the 10th floor of the building, and then using the sales channel. Only Uber Eats.
Yes.
So this kind of small expense business is more robust than big expense business. So what do you think about this kind of being more robust?
Yeah, definitely. If you anticipated this need and already worked this way, of course you're robust. But even if you do not anticipate and take a hit when the new coronavirus came, then if you can very quickly innovate and pivot to a way that works with the new situation, then you're maybe not as robust as others, but you're resilient. And I think resilience is a shared value too, especially around like island countries such as Japan and Taiwan, because we understand there are some like disasters like earthquake or typhoon that simply cannot be managed. Management doesn't work as a term against such a natural disaster, but we can be resilient in the sense of not only minimizing the damage, but also goes around the post-tsunami, the post-earthquake situations as a whole society. So while robust is more about a single individual or organization, I think resilience is part of the culture. It's the entire society. These two work very closely together.
Yes, yeah, this is a very valuable insight and advice. Thank you very much. My second question about myself. I and my wife got COVID-19 and were in the hospital for 3 weeks in April. That was a huge setback for us. But now, strangely, we feel somehow thankful for COVID. Because I'm a startup founder, COVID made me much stronger, bolder, and smarter person. So, for example, in biology, virus is somehow necessary for creatures' evolutions. So, in my opinion, how can we leverage COVID as an opportunity to become a person or stronger person, or better society or stronger society?
Yeah, first of all, congratulations on your recovery. And also, I think COVID shows that it is actually possible to live in a way that is sustainable. In many places where there's a lot of air pollution, a lot of water pollution, and so on, because of COVID, people have seen a clear sky for the first time. People have seen the clean water for the first time, because those structural issues around the environment were simply neglected, and especially for younger people, maybe for their entire life, they have seen the water and the air and the environment as a kind of damaged vision. But with the COVID comes the opportunity to see the natural habitat again as lively as it is. And you can't unsee it. You can't go back, right? Once people understand that it is actually possible through teleworking and through actually Uber Eats, as you mentioned, it is possible to reduce our overall footprint on the environment, live much more sustainably widely. And I think that is also a much needed way for the society to feel better, even after COVID, and recover in a resilient and sustainable fashion.
Yes, yeah, thank you very much. Next question is from my Taiwanese female startup founder. She said, you're representing Taiwanese multiple freedom as an icon, which is great. And Japan is a single ethnic country over thousands of years. And then this kind of paying attention to the details, culture, created Toyota's very efficient car manufacturing system, etc., which was great. But sometimes this lack of diversity blocks Japan from growth or innovations. So under pandemic and the global business competition, diversity is very, very important. So how can Japan implement the essence of diversity into our single ethnic country? What is the right balance between single way of thinking or diversity? And then how can we learn from Taiwan regarding diversity?
Yeah, I think diversity is not just about ethnic, though. In Taiwan, of course, our ethnic composition is fairly uniform, but our cultural composition is very diverse, right? Even for people who identify as ethnic Han, there are the Taiwanese Holok language, Taiwanese Hakka language, with at least 6 different sub-languages, and also, of course, Mandarin, but also spoken in different ways. So that's at least 3 different languages. And add to that, the National Languages Act recognizes the indigenous languages and also the sign language as a national language. So in our live streamed Central Academic Command Center press conferences, you actually see people sign a lot and learn about sign language vocabularies and so on. So first of all, I don't think it's only because I'm ethnically belonging to some group of people, it would prevent me from learning new cultures and new languages. Just like maybe you work in AI, so your native language is probably Python, but it doesn't stop you from learning, say, JavaScript or Rust or Go or some other languages. The more languages you learn, the more transcultural you become. You will be able to see the same problem from the object-oriented fashion, from a functional fashion, from a declarative fashion, and so on. And that makes you a better programmer, definitely, than if you only know one language. And so I think this transcultural attitude is more important than ethnic diversity. Ethnic diversity and inclusion is, of course, very good, but without this transcultural idea of intersectionality, it is simply just one dimension of a multi-dimensional human being, right? And so I think intersectionality is more important than ethnic diversity.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. My next question is, according to my Taiwanese friends, you never showed anger, or you are always calm. And having the mindfulness and being calm mindset is very important under the pandemic. Especially social media was chaos in this time. And which kind of 3 mindsets should we have to be the partner like you?
Yeah, first of all, I turn off all the notifications. I always work in the do not disturb mode. So I will not, for example, my phone will not go bing when we're having this conversation. And this is important to be distraction free. And the second thing is I limit my social media or indeed checking my inbox only once per half an hour. So I focus for 25 minutes and then I check social media or email for 5 minutes. It's called the Pomodoro method. That also helps a lot. And thirdly, I think it's important to have sufficient amount of sleep every night. I sleep on average 8 hours every night. If you have sufficient amount of sleep, then most of the short-term memory you gather the previous day will be written into long-term memory. But if you have a very short amount of sleep, then that's writing to the long-term memory is not yet done. And so you will live the other day with a lot of thoughts from the previous day still in mind. And that interferes, is kind of an internal distraction. And so having sufficient sleep also very important.
Okay, similarly, I used to work in Italy, so they are very optimistic about the way of thinking. And then recently, some of the celebrities committed suicide in Japan, and the suiciding rate was like 15% increase last month in Japan. So people are like getting pressure from the pandemic about the economy. So, well, similarly, but how can we maintain this optimistic mindset during the pandemic?
Well, I mean, it doesn't have to be optimistic. If you feel depressed, that is also a good time to reflect, to do some long-term thinking, to make sure that you don't miss some threads that could be missed when you're much more active, right? So it's like the time and tide. If you feel pessimistic, it's good for long-term strategizing. If you feel optimistic, it's good for actions. The trick is to make sure that the cycles are in a balanced fashion, like yin and yang, within the space of a day or at most a few days. If you spend half a year being optimistic, half a year being pessimistic, that's much more bipolar. But if you can limit that interval to at least a few days or a single day, like maybe do some like strategizing when you're going to sleep and list the actions you can take when you wake up, that's of course the best rhythm. So getting a kind of internal tempo going on, I think is very important. The tempo, the speed of going more active and more reactive, that will tend to balance one another.
Okay, thank you very much. And then a little bit back into the previous question, but well, we are Japanese single ethnic country, and then paying attention to details. This is really strength, but at the same time, we overthink sometimes. So we have many overthinkers. Overthinkers tends to become a pessimist sometimes. Or how can we overcome this overthinking culture?
Yeah, I think that's where the Leonard Cohen quote I just quoted, why it's so important. Because if you overthink, if you're a perfectionist, when you share the work you do, you know, other people may admire you, but there's really not much they can offer to support or help you because you already got it so perfect. And so a little bit of imperfection. In open source, we say, and I quote, release early and release often, unquote, meaning that even if you only have an idea, even if it's very much imperfect, as long as you say so upfront. And instead of pretending like this is completed work, you can just say, oh, this is a stub, like in Wikipedia. This is just a stub that people can grow upon. Then that's an invitation for other people to co-create. And so I think the importance of release early, release often really balances the perfectionism in overthinking. If you think a little and then publish, and then think a little and then publish, you can meet much more diverse set of people than if you think to 100% and then publish.
That really makes sense. Thank you very much. My next question is in your interview with Andrew Leonards, which happened in May 2020, you were mentioning about warm power versus sharp power. Also, hashtag Taiwan can help. This is a very important concept in 21st century. So the world should shift from competition to collaboration. So is warm power coming from Taiwanese culture, or since actually Taiwanese people are very, very warm to me? So how did you accelerate it with the power of the internet?
Yeah, I think, of course, the Taiwanese people are very much like pro-social, and the pro-socialness is amplified through the internet by making sure that people work out loud. There's actually a book about it, and working out loud meaning that just sharing what I'm working on, like this interview, is not just for the two of us or for reader of the book. Actually, we're going to publish either as a video or as a transcript everything we have said, and so basically dedicating it to the commons. And by commons, we mean that people can take it, and like the rap band Dos Monos in Japan, they maybe take whatever we have said and sample it into music, and that's fine too, right? And so the point here is that if you work out loud, you can meet people who take the kind of work that you do and on the direction that you did not anticipate. And that builds social relationships much more easily than if everybody have to sign a contract and pre-agree on whatever deliverable there are. Of course, there's a role of contracts in the financial sense, in the business sense, but a social contract in which that people agree to give more into the commons than we take from the commons is also very important. And that's the underlying idea of Taiwan Can Help, in that we are much more willing to help than we take from the international community.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much. So in your perspective, what's our biggest impact of the hashtag Taiwan Can Help? Which kind of things happened based on this hashtag?
Yeah, for example, there's a website called taiwancanhelp.us, and that asks who can help. Taiwan Can Help. And the great thing about this website is that it's not run by the government. There's zero government funding in it. It's just YouTubers, people who crowdfund and crowdsource the entire content. And just this morning, I actually went to the massive online open course, the Hahao channel, which you can see in Taiwan Can Help.us. If you scroll down a little bit, where they recorded from our vice president at the time, Dr. Chen Jianren, the crash course on COVID-19, because he literally is not just the vice president at the time, but actually wrote the textbook on epidemiology. And so this idea of people pulling in useful resources, sharing it with the international community, with the English dubbing and subtitle and so on, signifies the idea that Taiwan Can Help is not just a government thing, but rather everybody in Taiwan can dedicate, for example, a few masks for the international humanitarian aid. You can also see that in Taiwan Can Help.us. So it shows the diversity and the cross-sectoral participation.
Okay, great. And then a little sub question from that that answer is I personally think because I'm doing an AI project, this time in a pandemic, including infodemic, some people are lacking of the science thinking, like thinking like a scientist. And got panicked from the false information or biased information in social media or television or newspaper or someone else in the town.
Yes.
So science thinking is becoming more important now, especially for things like pandemic. What do you think about it? And how can we improve this science?
Yeah, definitely. I think the scientific method is something that people can practice. It is not just a abstract idea that you just learn about in school and then throw away. It's something that you can just keep doing, right? The idea is simply to learn about a basic priors or basic facts. And that's what the government can help, for example, with the vice president recording crash courses about coronavirus, or the Central Epidemic Command Center holding live press conferences every 2 p.m. During the pandemic and answer all the questions from the journalists. And that gives the basic observations. But now, based on observations, part of science thinking is you can form your own hypotheses, and through induction and through experiments, you can deduce new ideas and propose it for the community to evaluate, to replicate, basically. For example, there was a person named Lai Quanyu who tried to use the rice cookers and to disinfect the mask, and you can actually see the rice cooker right there, right? And then basically, Lai tried to put the medical masks in such traditional rice cookers, which, unlike the newer IH cookers, they don't have a ventilation hole, and so that makes the heating model very predictable. It will very quickly heat up to 110 Celsius and then very quickly cool down. And because of that, in the few seconds where it reaches more than 100 Celsius, it kills off the virus but doesn't destroy the material of the medical mask. And so he basically outlined the procedure of doing so and then share it with the community. Now, because the medical masks are theoretically one-time use, of course, the Taiwan Food and Drug Administration is quite skeptical of this idea that you can somehow reuse it. But then the TFDA did their own experiments, and much to their credit, they invited Mr. Lai to the daily press conference to teach the evidence of the hypothesis, while the minister Chen Shizhong actually cooked a medical mask in a rice cooker in front of all the people watching the live stream. So this is just one simple example, but it shows that science is something that we all participate and we can all replicate. It's not that just for a handful of scientists. Everybody can be a citizen scientist. And when it comes to reusing masks, these experiments are being replicated around the world. And nowadays we see from peer-reviewed journals that this even works for N95 masks.
That's a great story. And then similar question is, this time people got confused between the fact and opinions. And then many Japanese people believe like news is a fact, but the news can be biased because of the sponsor, because of the owner of the newspaper company. So as a scientist, scientists tend to think to believe in the fact supported by the evidence. So this kind of way of thinking is important, I think. But what do you think about it?
Well, I mean, even if there's no bias in the people running the news organization, the source that they collect those ideas from may be biased. And even if they use the most rigorous methods, like data science, still, if you have the wrong expectation of the data, then you may collect the data, but then accumulate data bias without realizing it. So there really is no escaping of bias. And what people can do is like listing an ingredient in the food label to list exactly what are the sources. Like in the journalism, if they use a research paper, it helps, of course, to include the DOI number so people can fact check themselves. And if we're doing data science, it also helps to list the data sets that we actually draw our conclusions from, so our peers may evaluate independently. So I don't think any single individual can be free of bias, but what we can do is to list our sources so that other people may benefit from independent verification. That's the beauty of that scientific method. It grows with the community.
Yeah, that's a great way to see it. Yeah, thank you very much. My next question is your collaboration with Seattle company Polis is very innovative, and then it is like a real-time visualization of the democracy. And since we run the machine learning hackathon community here in Tokyo, we are very interested in your insights. So what did you find by data analysis in people's opinion discussion? And then that will lead us to the next generation politics system. And then we should do the same here in Japan, I think.
Yeah, we use Polis from everything to, do with the open mountaineering, that's the hiking, to the opening up the oceans, that's like sea sports and so on, and to diplomatic conversations like with the de facto U.S. Embassy, the AIT, on the digital dialogues, and pretty much everything, right? There's even a website, polis.gov.tw, that is our locally hosted instance. So it's very much ingrained into our institution already. And the best thing I found about Polis is that it's AI in the 20th century. It's not AI in the 21st century, what with deep learning and so on, because it's actually much harder to explain the results if you use 21st century AI. If it's just 20th century AI, in Polis, it's mostly principal component analysis, mostly k-means clustering. These are ideas that even for a primary schooler, if you take some time to explain through the concepts, they can verify it themselves. But if you used any of those cutting edge like transformer models of deep learning, explaining it is actually very, very difficult. And so I think it helps to build data competence, that is to say, a self-confidence in producing and analyzing data instead of just consuming the results of a data analysis. It's like media competence is the ability to produce media versus media literacy, which is just about viewing or reading media. It's important to start small, to start with well understood techniques like the 20th century AI, and then build confidence in all the participants' ability to not only replicate the results, but also do their independent analysis. And then maybe you can add some more, like deep learning as an assistant, for example, smart categorization and so on. But these are nice to have. The core functionality, I think, must be very accountable, that's to say easy to explain, and also value aligned, meaning that it serves the best interest of the person using it.
Okay, thank you very much. The counter question about that comment is, I think the beauty of the power of the machine learning is finding counterintuitive fact. So did you find any counterintuitive fact in
definitely.
people's opinion?
Definitely. Yeah, the main police insight, which is surprising to pretty much everyone participating, is that actually people agree mostly with each other's points most of the time on most of the issues. And it's very counterintuitive because people to the more anti-social social media, which wastes people time just going through the ideologically charged, controversial issues. But in each social topic, these controversial ideologies are maybe just a few points. If you just say, okay, we agree to disagree, but then there's much more that we agree. For example, when UberX came to Taiwan, everybody agreed on the insurance, taxation, the fairness principle, registration, and so on. And while, of course, people may differ on what constitutes a sharing economy, some people think, you're not even carpooling, that's not sharing economy. But some people think, oh, it's sharing economy if there is a platform that does matchmaking of the idle hours of cars and so on. If you get caught up in those ideologies, of course, the society goes nowhere. But counterintuitively, policy shows that we actually agree on those rough consensus or those common values after all. So why don't we just regulate those? And then we can talk about those abstract concepts that are controversial later.
Okay, so do you think eventually optimization of the policies can be done based on the data science?
Yeah, definitely. I think data science offers a very rare but important glimpse, which is much more holistic to the entire society. A lot of the difficulty that we have when talking about like climate change, disinformation crisis, COVID, whatever, is that because the problem space and solution space is so large, it's very difficult to hold them in one's mind. So one would oversimplify. And once people oversimplify, but in different ways, it creates ideological differences, even though their value may be the same. And so data science can give a holistic, like dimensional reduction, right? It shows a interactive portrait of the actual problem space without oversimplifying to or only one or two dimensions.
So do you have any other example of the fact you found in the police and then made it as a policy?
Yeah, definitely. So for example, when we did the consultation with the AIT, the de facto US embassy, on promoting people-to-people ties in like across the world, there's a very controversial statement that says, and I quote, Taiwan should make English an additional working language. Even France have done the same, unquote. And it was very controversial. People don't like it, but there's also people who really like it. But the statement with the most consensus is that we need to prepare our education environment so that in due time, people will feel comfortable speaking native English. And so basically it's the same statement, but set in the future. Like for people who are in kindergarten, we need to prepare so that 10 years, 15 years down the line, they feel comfortable thinking in English. And now everybody agrees with that. And so I think this is important to realize that if you set far enough to the future, if you are patient enough, something that looks like a very controversial topic may actually get everybody's support. And of course, we develop our bilingual nation strategy based on that insight.
Mm-hmm. Do you think eventually data science can pick the weak voice in the society?
If we design to do so, of course.
Mm. Okay, thank you. My next question is, according to Gov0 team, your CoFact is one of the most active repository in the GitHub. And in this platform, people can crowdsource or fact check the rumors. It can be done in 60 minutes as an average. And then this could stop infodemic under COVID-19. And then how did you come up with this idea? And then how can we expand this open source plus crowdsourcing idea for other use cases and eventually the other countries?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the COVAX team have already spread, for example, to the Chulalongkorn University where we had a workshop. And if you remove the S and go just to cofact.org, it actually goes to the Thai version in Thailand of the COVAX repository. And so it has already seen a lot of adoption around the world, and especially in Thailand, which is very nice. But I cannot speak on behalf of the co-founder Johnson Liang, who really goes by the nickname MRORZ, Mr. ORZ, is actually the main mastermind behind this chatbot and also the main contributor for the first version of the COVAX. Of course, now it's a very large team. So I would encourage you to maybe ask Johnson. I mean, here is his GitHub repository and his contact details, and maybe he can share the full story because I'm just a promoter of COVAX, but I'm not part of the team that started COVAX.
Okay, I will definitely do so. Yeah, thank you very much. My next question is a little technical.
Sure.
You're known as a programming wizard, and then my Taiwanese engineer who's actually working for the GitLab Taiwan, and it says you can write 200 lines of code and can build amazing performance application.
Sure.
So what are top 3 key points when writing effective code?
Well, first of all, it helps to write it with the community. If I write just the bare bones without design, graphics, favorite icons, and so on, but I do it in the open, and I say, I know looks ugly, but send me pull requests, then everybody can contribute. And that's really the main key point, is to work out loud instead of working in isolation. The second thing also helps that you identify the project's social good in the very beginning. So even before you write the first line of code, think about your README, think about your tagline, think about your project name and hashtag, and how to communicate the social good of your project to any random stranger so that they will be motivated to contribute to the code base. And third, always, instead of asking people to sign a lot of consent forms and so on before contributing, just give them the capability to contribute. That's radical trust. And it's always easy nowadays that you can revert their changes if it turns out their changes doesn't make sense. But asking for permission is much more difficult than asking for forgiveness, right? If people can just go and change and say, oh, sorry, forgive me, I got it wrong, I made a typo or whatever, it's no big deal. But if everybody have to ask your permission, then you become the bottleneck for the project. And so by relieving yourself of the bottleneck, you can delegate away even the delegation to other people.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. And then your way of using radical trust is really interesting. What's the main difference between radical trust and trust?
Yeah, radical trust means that we give the right to commit. For example, when I was working on nowadays called Raku, but back in the time, the Pugs implementation, I give commit bits, that's to say the right to push into the shared repository, not only to people working on Perl and Haskell, but also Guido van Rossum, the creator of Python, why not? And even when someone, flames, like writes some toxic language about Perl on any of the forums, we often just reply saying, hey, here is a commit bit. You can contribute and make it better. It even evolved so that when there was a committer who was just giving birth to one of their child, we immediately gave the child a commit bit too, even though they're just newborn. And so basically, it's like Wikipedia, right? Anyone with an IP address can change our code, and we can figure out the forgiveness later if they've made some bad changes.
Okay, great. Similarly, lots of people in Japan, and maybe globally, wants to become an engineer, IT engineer this time because of the maybe bad economy. IT engineer can be highly paid and then can work remotely, regardless of the place. So, do you have any message to encourage this kind of newbie or wannabe engineers?
Yeah, I think in Taiwan, we don't call it software engineering. We call it program design. And it's the same thing, but it conveys a different idea. When you call it engineering, you think of someone who interacts mostly with machines. But if you call it a designer, that's someone who mostly interacts with other people. And so, of course, a real programming work involves working with people and working with machines, of course. And whatever code you write must be readable by machines, but also readable by humans. And so there's two sides of this job. I'm not saying that there's only one side, but since you're talking about software engineers, I would like to encourage them to not forget about the design part. Computational thinking, scientific thinking is great, but also design thinking. Learn about how to explore the various different values that people have, how to define a common value out of the diversity, how to develop according to various different prototypes concurrently, and how to deliver the final work, and also allow other people to deliver their version of their work, and that's design thinking.
Okay, thank you very much. So how can typical, because for example, one of the typical backend or machine learning engineer do not learn designing, then how can they learn designing without being a designer?
Yeah, I mean, design thinking is not about being a professional designer. This is about working through this iterative process to how to understand your fellow human beings and how to define those challenges and redefine problems and create innovative solutions. And if you can learn programming by going to, I don't know, Stack Exchange or whatever forum that people are having such a conversation, I'm sure that you can also browse, for example, the Interaction Design Foundation's description about design thinking and find the references and join the communities. I mean, design thinking always starts with an idea. And this idea is often just part of your life, right? You can see something that you want to see done better, and then it reaches you, and then you can reach to other people asking whether there are some other issues that you also want to solve in that vein. And that is the basis of interaction design, and that will then teach a different lens of problem solving. So if you're interested, I just pasted the interactiondesign.org's beginner's guide. You don't have to follow all the lessons, but that outline shows what's the learning path about design thinking, and you can start from a user experience perspective, from a user interface perspective, a front-end developer perspective, a user researcher perspective. There's many different entry points into the learning path of design thinking.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. And I'm also a big fan of design thinking, but my biggest learning today is what you are saying is design thinking, except UI UX design exists. In case of machine learning, in case of backend, everything can be designed. Right?
Yeah, that's definitely the case. Mechanism design, market design, service design, everything can apply the design thinking too.
Okay, thank you very much. My very last question is everyone praises your achievement, mask supply application, and its data visualization. So technically speaking, public API and the open data are essential to build it. So in your ICFP keynote, you said someone from Korea contacted you, but they couldn't make it. They couldn't build the same application in Korea. So we do not have a pharmacy open data API either. So how can other countries, for example, government or big company, proceed this open data movement? For example, persuading big company to provide more public API or allocating the budget to support civic tech hackathon.
Yeah, first of all, I was referring to early February, where we did the API for Taiwanese pharmacies. And at the time, of course, the Korean people do not yet have the open API. But what's amazing is that Finjan Kyang from Tainan City, part of the GovZero Slack channel, shared the API that he had with the people in Korea. And so, for example, the Seoul City, quickly, well, not that quickly, but eventually around March, set up such a API and followed by other cities as well. And so I think it's just a few weeks time. I think by mid-March, they do have a mask availability map going in their mask rationing system. And I also met the developers over video conference. Some of them are just like 15 years old, so it's excellent. And so what happens, I think, at that time is that the Korean government were seeing that there is a need, but they do not have an example. And what the civic technologists can show is that once you use the API, then instead of coding anything from scratch, the map that Finjan Kyang made in Tainan City can immediately work also as a map for the Seoul City, even though Finjan Kyang doesn't speak Korean, but he speaks JavaScript. That's the important thing, right? And so I think that enabled a real collaboration. In Japan, there's a very similar story about the code for Japan, people who work with the Tokyo metropolitan government to work on the Stop COVID dashboard. And again, because they work out in the open, the GovZero